Wait, this won't work. There you go. Now it'll work. Hello.
Hello, Happy New Year.
Turns out I'd unmuted Carlo and not myself, which, in the grand scheme of things, is a terrible decision. If anyone's ever got the ability to mute Carlo in your real life, just press the mute.
Fine.
Happy New Year. Yes, indeed. Happy New Year. It is 2022 now. We are now 1 year into the 2021 update.
Are we?
Have you got your faction pack yet from a non-Russian / Japanese / Taiwanese / Thailand / any of Singaporean sources?
Not in the UK, but
No.
I already have all mine. So obviously I'm not looking, but I'm pretty sure no, not out.
No, not in the UK. They are in America, right? I believe. So American releases is what dictates what's actually out and not in Simon's mind. So faction packs were out in 2021. Anyway, we'll bury that meme for 2022. Except of course we'll resurrect it when we inevitably talk about the 2021. I've started calling it 2021A, which is basically like the 2022 updates.
I mean, so this is interesting actually because I've heard whispers. Do you know what I mean? You always do. People always talk. True or not true? I've heard whispers that like the majority of everything in the game is changing, right? So is it going to be 2022 or is it still going to call itself 2021? Well, the new cards, well, okay, we're not expecting new cards. When they update the cards digitally, will they say 2021 on them or will they say 2022 on them? Because, the whispers that I've heard are that like more than half of all the units in like at least the factions that some people have told me about will be changing. So that's not a 2021.1, that's a 2022. Yeah. Which is great.
Yeah.
I'm not even gonna that's what I want. Well, I mean, we have talked about like the size of an update, whether or not you can change too many things or whatever, but like I'm not saying, can they please just edit 2 units or something like that? Like, if they are going to change a lot of stuff, I really do hope that they do just say, okay, this is 2022. Like, this is the 2022 update.
Yeah. I agree.
But
they aren't.
They're not going to because they still feel hamstrung by their ability to sell a physical card.
Yeah. It's always a difficult topic when we bring up like purchasing physical card packs and what that means to players, because people like playing physically. In terms of like the actual having the physical goods there. And don't get me wrong, we've talked about it to a great length before, Carlo. Having real cards is way better than having fake cards. But in the end of the day, having a game is more important, not having a good game. Yeah, if it is more than half, I mean, I've heard similar kind of rumors. I heard something that, to be honest, stuff that I would consider is kind of like balanced and not an issue is changing, which is concerning because I just look at it and think, well, you're changing the base level again, and that base level is what we're happy with. So if you're changing that again, are we just going to end up where everything relative to this point is now still a problem, but it's just different to what it was?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have said that when I heard a list of things that somebody said was changing, I would have said like half of those things. I was like, or maybe a third of those things. I'm like, they're balance issues. They need a change. They need a buff. They need a nerf that will bring everything else into viability if those things get buffed or nerfed. And then all of a sudden, I hear that like also loads of other things which are completely fine, except for the fact that other things are overperforming. So we'll see. I will go back to my old thing that like change is better than no change in terms of balance, right? Yeah. Like there is actually there is a very clear distinction here. There has been quite a bit of talk recently about whether or not like I'm not pro rule changes, because I think that the rules are very well set and are generally very good. I think balance change is always needed to keep things fresh, interesting, and exciting. I think that balance change is always beneficial. even if the balance you end up with is the same. A constant changing environment in which the game is played is better. But I'm not pro rule changes, so we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, volumes and things, everything all right. And yes, Bloodraven, it is strange because I've got a new headset. The old one is over here because it kind of was falling apart. Not like you probably knew, but yeah, new headsets, new world, new life, new me, right? 2022, new Mickey. Totally.
We can only
changed
wish.
completely. I'm more of a dickhead now. Anyway, yes, I agree. I think the core rules have not been an issue. And I've been arguing this, discussing it, arguing it, mix of the two really, a lot, saying that if you're adjusting a core rule, then what you're admitting, and we talked about it before Christmas, right? By changing the core rules, you're admitting that there's an issue with the core rules. There are some. I'm not going to sit here and say that there are none. But you have to know what those issues are and then how they're currently taken away and abused. We've talked about it at length, actually, Carlo. In saying one of our personal gripes is a mechanic that we actually use the most out of any mechanic at all, and it's the idea of the 1 inch rule, and charge blocking and position blocking and things like this. It's a needed part of a game that's rank and flank. You need to be able to position units and block, and you need to be able to control the field with movement. That's super important. But it's so defender orientated at the moment in the way that positioning works that that we've said before that it's actually problematic. It's why part of the reason why aggressive strategies at the top level are very difficult to pull off and in general just don't work. The core issues of the rules, though, I mean, the core rules we talked about before that they're changing, not an issue. Much, much, much rather see proper balance units and things with which the rules will then work themselves around. And if we find a problem with the rules, we'll find a problem with the rules.
We'll find a problem with the rules.
Of course we will. Well, actually,
let's not pretend. Let's not pretend.
I will actually go as far as saying that it's our job, and I don't mean me and you, Carla. I mean it's our job as players. It's our job as players to play the rules and to play them to a point where we can find where there's problems. If we're not playing the rules to the point where we're finding issues, then either A, the rules are perfect, that never happens, or B, we're not actually testing them properly. We're not giving them the proper watermark tests they should be getting from actual competitive players. So, yeah. Soren wants us to explain charge blocking for the 100th time, probably.
He is right. It is the 100th time.
Yeah. It's simple process, really. In order to have a charge that's legal, you have to be in something's arc, and that arc has to have at least 50% or more of its base visible. So at least 50%. If it doesn't have 50% of its facing visible and a unit we can fit in there, then you can't charge it in that arc.
So just to be really clear on that is the arc that you are in is the facing that you must be able to fit into, and you must be able to fit 50% or more in that facing.
That's it. It's actually that simple. It's deceptively easy.
It's very simple. It's very simple in wording. There are many, many, many positions that are created by that rule in which you can make it not legal for your opponent to charge you.
Yeah. Including ones which don't look like they should be illegal, but they are. Fun.
No, yeah. That's when it's frustrating. When a unit is almost in the open and another unit's right next to it, and it's like, no, but you can't charge me. And you're like... But anyway, I'm still undecided whether or not I believe it's better or worse than when units used to get pulled by the attacker.
Yeah.
Neither are great.
Neither.
But I don't know which one I dislike more.
Being able to pull units.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's what Brett just asked.
Being able to pull units isn't fun. As a player, you always want to have the agency of control based, like the things that your units do is something that you've said that they do, or a known impact of what would happen. Like you're attacking a unit with a defensive ability, and it uses the defensive ability to do damage to you. Well, you knew that could happen, so you took that into your consideration in your decision making. Surely, it's when there's things outside of your agency that you don't really control, and it's not actually that relevant for most charges or a good proportion of charges. If you're pulling the enemy unit around, where it is more important is things like cavalry, because cavalry can just say, yeah, but I'm not here anymore. I'm now here and charging you from there, and that's going to pull your unit like this, and that's just not a form of pulling or agency that you ever had control of. So, pulling opponents' units.
I would say that I think that the old usage of pulling the defender to meet you happened pretty rarely.
Yes.
But when it did happen, it was really bad. Like, it normally left a really bad taste in your mouth. And it was abusable in the same kind of way, in reverse, where the attacker could put a position could position such that they have to pull you, and they pull you into like a really bad situation. Like they pull you off objectives, for example, right? And what they do is they set up Unit 1 so that it covers most of the defender's base. Then they charge with Unit 2. Unit 2 can only just clip now because Unit 1 is blocking most of the space. Unit 2 makes the charge and drags that unit right into 50-50 coverage with them, and in doing so pulls the defender off of a token. And that can be like a huge victory point swing, or like it can be entirely game changing, right? And all they're intending to do is not really do any damage with the charge. They're literally just pulling the defender into contact with them.
You used to be able to do it with free folk all the time.
Yeah,
you could
free folk were the worst for it
because they had units, right?
Yeah, and bears were prevalent at the time as well. Like,
this is
so all those things combined.
1.6, right? Most of this is like 1.4 when the charge rules changed. So even bears weren't even released at that point when the old charge rules were like that. But it was just things like, you would just charge a unit in and it's like, suddenly your flank's opened up. What?
Yeah.
How's my flank opened up by an enemy charging me?
So I would say that it happened less often, because I really do think that charge blocking happens in every high level game now. Like, like you are constantly looking at and setting up and considering charge blocking, whereas it was a relatively rarely used nasty tactic to pull people around purposefully before. It happens way more now, but I think that it's less negative when it happens. It's just accepted as absolutely part of the game now. Whereas before, if it came up, if it happened, if somebody did it to you, you were like, "Oh, come off it." Do you know what I mean? Like, so I really don't know which one I think's worse.
I will go as far as saying, and this isn't meant to be a bad thing, but I do think the game's come on since then. I don't mean in rules, but I mean the game has come on since those days. Quite significantly. I mean, the rise of the online scene has happened since that point. The conglomeration of internationally good players from across the world has come together. Not saying that this didn't exist to some extent beforehand, but it was much, much more smaller. Like, you had a national event winner, and usually that was it. You didn't have anything international that was significant. The closest we got in the UK was like the odd player going to like ETC or something, and even then it was like one event. European continent, you can treat the European continent as like the whole of the US in terms of like tournament structure and who can travel where. So that's like someone traveling from Texas to New York. But the difference is that like we have had come a long way. I don't know if as many high level games to the level we see them now were occurring, and thus I don't think we saw the mechanic abused as abusable as it was. Because even even going back when we were playing in that point, we didn't we used it was a thing that happened, but we didn't use it. Do you know what I mean? It was just a thing that happened in the game. I didn't think that we even abused it at the time, most of the time. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just a thing. I mean, even charge blocking. We've always done charge blocking since 1.6. But we never
as soon as it came in, it was so obvious what a charge block was, and it was like the first thing that loads of people did and used continuously.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Anyway,
I wonder where I slightly agree with Camille that actually charge blocking might become less of an issue when commanders score, like sitting in the corner scoring 2 points a turn isn't such a go-to important tactic. When any unit can control an objective for equal value, then maybe I agree that it slightly lessens the importance and value of charge blocking, because people are far less likely to be sacrificing units blocking wise just to keep their commander from being engaged and from being contested, because those 2 points, generally speaking, make or break the game. So it might, maybe slightly improve things when commanders aren't the be all to end all of objective play.
the issue you've got is that and where I think you'll see, this was always a problem beforehand, but it is definitely perhaps more telling now, is if someone controls the center objective against an like examples, a very defensive army, right? If you've lost the game in the early stages of the game, bad positioning, bad movement, whatever, and the defensive units, such as like, I don't know, Lannister guardsmen maybe, or something like that, get to a center objective and are able to hold it with units like providing cover on the flanks, whatever. Your option, of course, there is to go, right, well, I'm going to push down a flank to try and swing the defense round to then open it up and kind of like can open it, right? And just come round and attempt to outmaneuver the units. Whereas charge blocking, what you'll see potentially more, I think, is charge blocking on the flanks of the game board, which we already see a lot anyway. But just to hold the game up, because if you're slower at flanking me, it means that I'm winning faster because I'm scoring the extra point in the middle. That is something that's been prevalent at beating free folk for a long time, is that you just stick all your heavy things in the middle of the board and you just stick some garbage on the flanks and just make it a miserable time to kill the garbage on the flanks and just hold the center for as long as you can. And if you do all of that, then it can work.
Chris Heading wants to know what the mixed meta that Brett's talking about. I'm going to offend everybody as always and say that the mixed meta is when Europeans beat Americans.
Yeah,
that's the mixed meta that Brett's talking about.
No,
and then we all lose to the Indo-Australians,
who, by the way, at the moment,
that's the true mixed meta.
Randomly, if you look at the power rankings, the Indo-Australians aren't actually doing that well. Bizarrely, it is nearly all entirely Europeans in the top, purely because of play rate, right? The Europeans play a lot of games, which helps, but they play a lot of games and win a lot. But then you have a solid core of the Americans coming in within the top 20, but it's majority UK at the moment.
I mean, that has just reminded me, particularly Camille's response that the mixed meta is not the old USA 2 NCU meta. Do you remember when like literally like the discussion of our time was that the Americans played 2 NCUs and the Europeans played 3 NCUs by majority, not exclusively. And the discussion was, imagine if they ever played each other, which one would win? Turns out that it was 3 NCUs, by the way, guys.
Well, that's actually the super funny thing.
Back then, absolutely, without a doubt. It is way closer now, but back then.
This is actually the point, like the most interesting point, right? Is the Americans, and if you look at the American players that we see typically doing very well, they swapped away from that quite early on. I mean, Brett was already playing 3 NCU in America a long time ago and saying, 3 NCUs is fine, but and then he seems to defend 2 NCUs now, which is fine. But the likes of Chris Tran, Losberg, other players as well, also moving across playing 3 NCUs, and they have been ruining their own metas. And more importantly, they actually, the World Cup that we ran, right? The first round was 50% European, 50% American in terms of qualifiers after the first round, meaning that Americans had, taken the information, the knowledge, the plays and things that had been developed internationally and applied them in just about the same way and to the same efficiency that everyone else had. So the idea that there was an American versus European scene by the time like the World Cup came around was kind of like a bit of a untruth really. By that point, they'd already melded together. Um, So I mean, yeah. What else was I going to say? Yes, the
I
end.
would agree with Tara. I would
Go
agree
on.
with Tara that Europeans treat, and I do, I genuinely do. I treat the game similar to playing a Euro style
Worker
board
placement.
game,
Yeah.
worker placement, which is that like I want to take guaranteed actions. I do not want to risk anything to a dice roll.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, like going into a big board game analogy is what Ameritrash derogatorily termed. I don't believe that there is a maybe I think they're sometimes called thematic games. Is their non-derogatory term?
I've never heard that.
But generally they're called Euro games or Ameritrash, and Ameritrash is generically considered chuck loads of dice, see what happens. Euro games is considered to have no luck involved at all. Whoever plays the best strategy wins. And lots of very high rated European players lean, coincidentally, because their terms are not based around the same thing, lean on the Euro style of play, which is I never take a risk. Everything I only do if it's a guarantee. And it generally leads to a much better result. Generally, it leads to them being much better. And yes, they are objective campers because it's a guaranteed result to score a victory point from holding an objective. You're never guaranteed to kill your opponent's unit, which is the other way to score victory points.
Yeah. Guaranteeing killing unit is just not the case unless you're playing certain factions who just one shot everything off every time. So...
But the merge between wargame and board game
yeah.
is what's so interesting about Song of Ice and Fire. The fact that there are tactics card play, that there are, as Tara says, it has worker placement, which is like the tactics board NCU. The NCU board is genuinely just a worker placement game. Whoever gets there first gets to pick the zones that they want. Whoever does whatever, like their guaranteed actions. It's very interesting. The whole melting pot of various backgrounds and styles that come into it. You've got elements of, more traditional war games, and then you've got elements of board games, and you've even got elements of card games in there, which is what I love about the game. But
Carlo just ripped my soul out.
Exactly. That's the exact thing. Are the changes moving it away from that melting pot of ideas and pushing it towards the war game style? Because some people believe that to play it in a Euro style, in a worker placement style, in an objective strategy style, not a fighting style, they consider that a very negative play experience, or just like they don't like that strategy works at all. It's very interesting, like fundamental philosophical question, and we'll see what happens to the changing in scoring and the lowering of scoring, because it will increase the value of the war game aspect and decrease the value of strategy, basically. Like, without saying that fighting doesn't require strategy, like the strategy is normally just to score victory points by guaranteed way. If we consider that to be the strategy aspect of the game and the war game aspect to be rolling dice, trying to get lucky, make kills, take on charges at anything more than like a 1+, even with the 1+ mechanic, making everything a constant risk. It is interesting whether or not that dynamic will change, and I do think that the game will slow down with the -1 scoring
100%.
taken away from the +1 taken away from the commander.
100%. I expect every game to at least go one more round. Any of the three, anything ending in round 4, God forbid anything with round 3 as well. But any of those 3 or 4 ends are going to go to 4/5s now, almost guaranteed. Not necessarily, Carl. Not necessarily. Ameritrash is not all about tons of dice and components and heavy rulebooks. Not necessarily. The big thing for me, and I think this is, I've always said this, and I've always been a kind of like advocate, because I always think that A Song of Ice and Fire is always talked about wrongly, is that people call it a war game, and I've never called it a war game. It's a miniatures game. They don't even call themselves a war game necessarily. And the reason I don't call it a war game is for very simply, like, it is completely fantastical. It's completely made up in terms of like any of the stats, any ways that the game interacts with itself is all obviously fabricated, which is fine. You could argue that the same with the likes of fantasy and things like that. But the core concept is it's not actually about the war. It's nothing to do with fighting. You win a game by either killing all your opponent's units, or your opponent not having left on the board, slight difference, or by scoring a certain number of victory points. The game is a clock game. You are going to play to 6 rounds or to this many VPs, the person with the most at this point, or the person who has the only units left on the board by definition, therefore winning the game because they can't not score points, is going to win the game, right? I don't call it a war game. It's never been about the fighting for me.
Not that everybody should leave our amazing live video and go and watch something else. But the video that I've just posted into the chat is actually the funniest video I have ever seen on YouTube. I'm not like, without a doubt, for me, it is the funniest thing going on. That's weird. It hasn't popped up in your chat. Is it? No, do we block me putting up links?
No.
Can anybody see the link that I just put up? It's just a link to another YouTube video.
If need to, just drop it to me and I can put it in the chat directly from here.
I'm blocked from my own YouTube channel.
You gave me too much power. There you go. It might just take a while. Yeah,
send that to the viewers. They have to watch it. It's only a minute. It's only like 1 minute long. It's called Ameritrash versus Euro games.
Honestly,
and this guy's actually.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, maybe I have blocked you. I can't remember. Well, I mean, it's silly. I'm logged in as you over here.
Maybe just it's with my other account. So yeah. Terra, Ameritrash versus Euros by Pro ZD or whatever his name is. When he says like on Jamestown when he says like you may not spend fish unless you're British, and I'm like it kills me. It is the best 2 minutes of my life.
There you go.
But we do great YouTube as well, Mickey, right?
Yes. We do absolutely
I think our viewer count just went down by about 20, so I think
and his subscriber count went up by 20, so there you go. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a weird one. The game is brilliant because of the meld of different of aspects, and if I would actually argue that if you take out the card play aspect, the objective aspects of the well, in fact, I challenged anyone to watch this video. Go out there if you think the game is fantastically amazing, which me and Carlo do. Take out those components and just play it as a war game on the table, fire and blood basically, and don't play with objectives. And actually, I think it loses virtually all of its appeal. Personally.
I was just about to say, like, I have actually heard of some, like, super, super rare, like, some groups who play without the tactics deck. And I'm like, what? Why? What? Like, I'm literally like, why would you do that? Like, I'm just like, go play Warhammer.
That's actually the funny thing is if you take out the likes of the NCU board, you take out the tactics deck, the tactical depth of the game on the board actually isn't that high. Like, I think
if you take out the ability to manipulate the board through the use of anything else, then there's not a lot going on in the board.
No, I think a lot of people, and too many people, I think the game is some kind of tactical mastermind game where it's really difficult to learn and teach and to be good at it. I disagree on a very fundamental. I think the game itself, the core board, if I stuck the game on and to anyone who's played a war game before, and we disregard the tactics board and we disregard the deck for a moment, and they say, here's some units, this is the stats, and this is how the stats interact with each other, go out there and have a plan, I actually think most half-decent wargamers can get a very quick hang of the game, the tactical movement, and how things will work very, very, very quickly. To the point where the game would not be interesting because it is just kind of smashing blocks of troops together. It is exactly that. It's the tactics board and the decks, the card driving mechanisms that really give it the uniqueness that the game deserves, and actually makes it a good game. And Joey W says the game without tactics boards or cards is kind of lame.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about that. It's just I have a stat line and you have a stat line, and see how the stat lines eventually work out. Sag, top trumps, units.
I do slightly agree with Tara, which is that I believe the way that units have abilities and stats and add attachments is better than some other war games. Warhammer Fantasy, for example, is a better core concept for playing on the board than the core concept of I have X number of models, every single model has its own profile, plus I have a hero, I can put as many heroes as I want in a unit, each one has its own profile, rolls its own dice, does its own thing. I do actually believe that just a unit plus attachments is a good mechanic. Like that part of the table is good, is nice, and it's very sad that it's not an optimal strategy for nearly all factions to use attachments at all, because the way attachments work is actually much better than the way heroes worked in fantasy, and with them being either their own model or being attached to a unit or being this thing. No. A model in a unit who is intrinsically attached to them, like they're his bodyguard or something, is way better. That it's an I go, you go game also, Soren's right, is a very good thing, but that plays very much into the concept of the tactics board and the other board game aspects going on. There are I go, you go war games, but actually it's much more of a board game mechanic to have an I go, you go system.
Yeah. I do think as well on the topic of I do think on the topic of like Warhammer Fantasy and the simplicity of the game, if you will, comes back to the point of like learning it as well. The game is very simple. Everything is basically the same. Choosing a unit is very easy. When you're given, and this comes from even if you take away fantasy for a moment, take away 40k for the moment, which are huge games. If you consider something of it's older stuff that Warhammer has got, but things like even Wartime, the Gorka Morka rule sets, all of those kind of rule sets out there that were much smaller scoped games, where list building is by definition a lot smaller, in theory a lot easier. There's that many options and that it's that difficult to choose things before you even get to the playing the game stage, that the game isn't simple enough to just pick up and play. You actually have to have an innate understanding of the rules before you can even select stuff. So Ice and Fire, if you say you've got 40 points, choose 40 points worth of stuff, you have to have a commander. You're only allowed one attachment each unit. Basically anyone can build a list. Okay, doesn't mean it's good, right? We're not getting to that point. But even if you've got someone who's even remotely seasoned in games and they go, oh, I'll have some cavalry, I'll have some archers, I'll have some infantry, they've probably got like a half decent list outside of optimization without any actual knowledge of gameplay.
Yeah. I would say outside of people who really know how to list build and really know how to use what they've just built and why they're picking certain things, you will do fine just picking units either thematically or randomly. You will do fine. Like, you really will do fine. And that is very good in terms of the way that it can get people into the game very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. People talk about panic as well. Now, panic's a weird one because I've played games where panic is basically not a mechanic. It's just like a thing that you do every now and then. It's like, it minorly affects your stats. And to be honest, it's just not an important factor because everything eventually becomes panicked. It's a particular game I play where if you have like a panic state, you get -1 to hit. And over the course of the game, in order to take it off, you have to like rest. Of course, over the course of a game, because the games are so short, that resting is almost not worth the action. Therefore, everything just becomes panicked, and everything's just at -1 to hit on like round 2, and you just live with it.
Yeah.
So it's almost irrelevant. Whereas on the flip side, having it the Warhammer Fantasy style, I got cavalry charged by a unit, and then I needed to not roll a 12, and I rolled a 12, and my unit crumbled, and I lost a huge unit just like that. Done, game over. Yeah, that's also thankfully not in the game.
Yeah, I mean, like in Warhammer Fantasy, tons of high level play. People would, I mean, like there was some very terrible strategies in various editions around like skirmish spam, wood elves archer spam, multiple small chaff blocking unit spam, all these different things. But generic staple block of continuous competitive strategy was very high leadership with rerolls.
Yeah.
Because people just would lose a game not being able to pass a 10 plus test, or 10 or less, 10 or below on 2 dice, because it's or below. You've got you're I forget what it even was called now. I was about to say unbreakable, but there's a rule that allowed your morale to never go down. So you were at a 10 and you always rolled at a 10, but then you just roll an 11 and then you're like, all right, well, I'm running and I'm dead. And it's just like, oh, cool. Well, that's like half my army.
Yeah.
And so people put tons of focus onto their ability to avoid panic when it was such a huge part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like, here's one to test how long everybody's been around. I mean, does everybody remember that a D3 didn't used to be involved at all? I'm not even talking about D3+1. It used to be how much you failed the panic test by. Remember the old Cersei, the old school Cersei bomb? Cersei would give you a -2, then she'd take the crowns. That was a -3. You roll the test, and however much you failed the test by was how many wounds you took.
I legitimately
I actually liked it.
I remember playing.
I still like it.
I remember playing a game of Clash of Kings against Dan, our Night's Watch player at the time, who put a stone throw on the board to start with. This is when you only had 2 units on the board to start the game with. And I was going first, and I moved or something. I can't remember what I did. And he shot his stone thrower, and his stone thrower landed on my unit. It killed 4 guys, and my morale was 8, and I crit failed the panic on like a vicious test or something silly like that. The catapult was, and I lost 12 guys from that one stone thrower shot, losing a unit completely. And I was like, fuck's sake, I might just lose the game. On the first activation of the next turn, he might just shoot his catapult and kill my other unit before I can do anything. That was not fun. It wasn't fun. Doesn't that mean the mechanics were bad though? That was stone throwers being fucking awful for the game. Back in 1.4 and 1.5, as well as they are now in 2021 to some extent. So yeah, it did end quickly. Joe knows where it's at.
It was like, yeah, if you thought that Mel remote panic damage was bad, like, you never played the old Lannister versus Free Folk matchup where it was just like you just put Cersei on a unit and just like deleting a unit a turn across the table, and that didn't have any like self-inflict mechanics the way
take a -3 test.
No, yeah, you would just like take a -3 test and take as many wounds as you fail by, and then they'll like fail, take like 6 wounds, and then you're like, okay, take another test now, and this time I'm playing Hear Me Roar, so now you're on like a -6, and it was just like, right, cool, yeah, just take them off, mate. And it is interesting. Ilya says that Legion has a good system. I don't know Legions really well. Is he possibly talking about suppression? I know suppression is a large part of what Legion does, but I don't know Legion super well. But Legion is actually, like, I almost got into Legion instead of Song of Ice and Fire. There were a set of people at our club who played it. If I hadn't already gotten into a Song of Ice and Fire, like, 3 months, 6 months before Legion. I think that they're very similar games, and that if I didn't play Song, I would happily play Legion instead. I think that Song's better. Obviously, I've played tons more Song, but when I first played Song for a little while, I wasn't super into it yet. I was still just learning it, still just getting used to it. And then I played Legions. I was like, this is really similar, but not quite as good.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. I don't know how much Legion's come along or how much it's improved. I also, this is a big thing for me, I much prefer, even though I know that there's an abstract element of this faction never fought this faction, this blah, 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 blah. I much prefer the 8 factions that Song has and the way they interact, as opposed to the way that Legion has multiple starter boxes with, Rebels, Empire, droids, clones, and they're from different eras of the game and should never ever really be played against each other, but are. And there's only a few factions to choose from, and there's basically just a thematic good versus bad, as opposed to here's 8 factions, anything can play against anything, and rightly should, and like thematically it all works. That's actually my biggest gripe with Legion, or with any game. I prefer a game to have a single timeline, single world build, and there to be many options for you to identify with a particular faction within it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the nature of the Star Wars universe, unfortunately, though, in that it is one gigantic timeline that's separated by far too much time. Which, if anyone saw the Game Awards coming up back in the last year, a month ago now, if you saw the Game Awards, you'll know that there is a High Republic game coming out for Star Wars. So there you go. Anyway, that's a random side avenue. But yes, in terms of morale stats similar to attack profiles, so having like different morale at different ranks, Joey, it is something that me and Carlo have talked about, and it has some merit, of course. I
like it.
It has some negatives as well, in terms of it's another very difficult thing to balance well. And if you argue that they're not balancing some stuff well already, is another statistic that you have to think about 3 times in a unit, actually something that can very easily be balanced. It also plays away from the idea, or it can play into the idea, it's up to you. Is morale going to get worse as the unit goes down, or is it going to get higher? Like, this is a fundamental thing you have to decide, and it can only ever get worse or higher. It wouldn't make sense for it to spike at a small number of troops, but then get lower when you get lower than that, so on and so forth. Yeah. But the other side of it as well, and this is the big thing that I've always said, and I've said it in the last episode actually. I think that the morale stat should be separated from the damage taken. I actually think that the damage taken, being a D3, as annoying as it seems at the moment, is a fair mechanic. Because the D3 is just a D3. It's for anybody, and it's your chance of failure that matters, not by how much. Because in the same vein that free folk used to take a panic check and lose a load of models, I've also seen and been on the receiving end of Carlo saying to me, take a check on an 11 or 12, and if you fail, you're going to take like 6 or 7 models off, and I pass. And it's like, oh shit. And those the problem is the binary level of it. Being you either pass and take nothing, or you fail and you take tons.
Yeah.
And Carl said it to some extent, the there's too many mechanic. Yeah, there's too many as a card, I don't think is particularly problematic, but it plays into an already difficult mechanic, and it's quite easy to get a decent bonus on it, and I do think it's one of the strongest cards free folk have for that reason. And it is a horrible thing to be on the receiving end of. I still am very much a fan of just having an independent stat for a unit saying, look, if it fails, it takes this amount of damage up to modifiers that are then added on top. Because, you could have poor fellows having shit morale then. You could actually make them like 20 morale. Fuck it, you'll never pass a panic test, ever. But you only ever take 1 damage when you fail. So it doesn't fucking matter that you fail lots. Baratheons can actually have a really good morale for all their morale-based passing cards, and it wouldn't matter. But when they failed, it could be like, oh yeah, well you're going to take 5 wounds now, or something like that. It's more swingy, but actually over the course of a game, that should average out. I don't think it should be as high as 5 or 6. Though.
I don't necessarily agree with that. It is an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I would implement, the thing that I believe,
I know what you're going to say here. Attacks
is
doing 1 damage, panics doing 3. That is a problem. I agree.
Panic. The simple rule that I would implement is that a panic test can only ever do as many wounds as the attack that caused it.
Mm-hmm.
If the attack does 1 wound and then you fail the panic test, the panic only can do 1 wound. You do 2 wounds, 3 wounds. You do 2 wounds, 3 wounds. 3 plus, or like you do 6 wounds and then somebody plays theirs too many, then it can do 6 wounds. The amount of wounds that you are capped on is the amount that the damage did. Panic will only ever double the amount of damage you take, not turn 1 wound sneaking through into like 15 wounds. And that is very important because it brings value back to having armor, whereas armor isn't super valuable if you don't also have great morale, because everybody just forces through 1 wound with like precision or like a roll or vulnerable or something, and then they're like, oh, and take, bang, here's a test, take 6 wounds from the morale test or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we're talking about card play, we're talking about bonuses, but it's so reliable for people to be able to force through that kind of test. Whether or not that includes a change to the D3 mechanic or not, I don't really know or care. But what I think is that you should make the panic capped by the amount of damage the attack did. I think that pairs up with you allowing attacks to be bigger again, right? Like, I think that we've gone way too far into the actual attack damage being really, really low. And when we looked at it, I was amazed that I realized that basically every unit in the game on its maximum ranks has either 6 attacks or 7 attacks. That's it. You have 6 attacks or 7 attacks, and you either do or don't have some keywords.
The odd unit has a 5. It's like a dedicated archer unit.
Yeah, like you have to be truly terrible to be 5. You have to be like Poor Fellows or an archer unit in combat or something like that. Everybody has 6 or 7. And you know what? When you look, something like 80% of them have 7. The only way for you to not have, like, to cap yourself at 7 hits is to have crit blow. And I think that overall, I would like that attack damage potential to be much higher, but for us to be less, to be more intrinsically attached to the way that panic damage is done. So it's not just an overall increase in damage because panic is still high. We're talking about making the attacks more valuable, but the panic's less valuable. Would be my personal change.
That is, I tend to agree. And you know what? It's counter to what everyone probably is going to say. It's like, oh, but panic tests are how you kill things. Carlo, for a full fact, although panic tests is how perhaps one-shotting things happens, the actual way that, for example, I play Free Folk and the way that we play is that it's never about the panic test where I'm beating you, really. It's about the fact that I'm going to roll close to 20 dice at your unit over the course of a round. And if I'm doing that number of attack dice, okay, fail panic tests are how I'm going to kill you. But it's the number of attacks I'm throwing at you. I'm bound to do wounds to you. And you can't weather that number of dice alone. Because the panic then comes in and says, here's the extra 1 or 2 that you need. I do agree, though, that I shouldn't be doing 1 wound and then doing 3 more, or even 4 more, or 5 more, or 6 more. But saying that, it allows you to get through the 2+ armor saves, which otherwise can sometimes be problematic for certain factions. And here's the problem. Not all factions are created equally. You stick a 2+ armor save in front of Starks, and actually, if Starks aren't running Warcry, and if they're not running any form of Sundering in the list, really, you've got the Wolves, or you've got card play to get Sundering. 2+ armor saves actually a fucking pain in the ass for Starks to really deal with, because they're also probably activation parity. They're not out activating, getting flanks.
And because they have little ways of forcing through panic damage.
Yeah, exactly.
outside of Warcry is their only real one, so they just have to fight through the armor, and they are reliant on that actual attack roll.
Yeah.
And so armor has value against them.
Yeah.
And Doug's saying poor guardsmen. Obviously, like in my theoretical world where attacks generate panic checks, which are capped, if you have other ways of generating panic checks, they're probably not capped, right? Because they're not attached to a particular attack. So, say you're talking about the Crown's test. The Crown test isn't capped because it's just a panic check which you take. It's not a panic check because of an attack.
And it does bring a lot of value back to those panic checks as well.
Yeah.
Because at the moment taking crowns is pointless, to put it bluntly.
Which would bring big value to things like Lannister supremacy. Not that it doesn't already have good value. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a theoretical. But that is the change that I would implement myself straight away. Not even necessarily on terms of balance or things like that. I think that's one of the most feel bad things in the game right now, that you can force through 1 point of damage and then get rid of a whole rank or even 2 because of like some massive card play on top of it.
Mm-hmm. I do think though that having the option to do panic damage, as long as it's not consistent, I mean, you can complain about free folk doing it, but realistically, there's only 2 cards that allow them to do big panic check fails. Otherwise, it's just lots of panic checks, and it's just lots of damage racking up rather than big chunks. The ability to do big chunks of damage has to exist through panic, because otherwise you can never clear off very defensive units. We already know about defensive units that are possible with the likes of 2+ armor saves, moving into 4, maybe even 3 morale. Like, that would become almost immovable. And while I agree that that's a good thing for the game, you need almost immovable objects. If people don't have a solution based around not outnumbering it, if it has to be a solution that's like my unit of equivalent cost has to be able to get through this, you've got to allow people to spike, because if you don't allow spike, we move again into a healing meta, which we're already in, and oh god, I don't want to. Imagine if we got rid of all the spiking in the healing meta right now. You get rid of things like Spearwires, Bottom Bastard Girls, they disappear for a moment. What else has spike? Flayed Men lose crit blow. All of these things, all the spike went away. I'm fairly sure everyone would just be like, I can't kill anything. Nothing dies. I just heal everything and nothing ever dies. I mean, we've played games, Carlo, where literally, basically nothing dies. I played a game at Bloodraven where 1 unit died across the whole game. And it wasn't even like we did loads of wounds elsewhere. No, it was like a unit and like 8 other wounds across the board at the end of the game. That was it.
For Jesse, Jesse asks, why are people scared of panic damage but fine with regular damage? And I did have to think about it. You know what I mean? Like, am I just scared of panic damage? Do people just consider panic damage an MPE, whereas attack damage not? For me, the one specific thing is, like, what makes panic damage worse goes back to this idea that it's binary, that the D3 already says that I can take anywhere from 1 to 3 wounds, right? If I start adding on, a +3 onto that test, somehow there's too many, hear me roar, these kind of things. We could be talking about it's a 2 to a 5 or a 4 to a 6, right? Which feels less all or nothing. But I don't like the single dice mechanic on the D3 for a start, that is so impactful. But also the pure fact that, as Mickey says, you roll an 8, you take no wounds. You roll a 7, you take 3 wounds. Like, I don't like it being so all or nothing, whereas I'm okay with attack damage dealing more damage, because when you look at the curve of the way that normalizes itself, what it means is that, like, the average goes up by like half a wound, goes up by 1 wound, but it's very consistent across a whole range of damage. You know what I mean? Like, you could take 1 wound, you could take 2 wounds, you could take 3 wounds, you could take 4 wounds, 5 wounds, but it's a very extreme and unlikely situation for you to take 5 wounds from some attack when you got good armor and all these things. But it's not unlikely for you to take 3 wounds from a failed panic check. That's just as likely an occurrence as taking 2 wounds or 1 wound.
I tell you what's interesting. Going back to 1.6, people used to complain. I'm going to focus on free folk, right? Because it was a part of the conversation. Whereas people didn't seem to think Starks did the same thing. But people always used to say about free folk, they wear these big units down by making them take lots of panic tests. And my argument was always like, yeah, because they shit, like, they don't hit hard. They just make you take fucking tons of panic tests, and you keep failing them, because eventually you'll keep failing them. But that's actually another point as well, is that panic tests at the moment in the game, unless you're playing certain factions, don't actually happen enough. So you don't get the averaging across the game quite enough, and that means it actually swings both ways. You'll have games where it doesn't average, and you end up passing too many tests that you probably realistically shouldn't over the course of an average dice set, or you fail more statistically than you should across the rolls you've got because you don't roll enough panic checks to do a statistically large data sample to get the averages. And this works for both ways. Free folk, I've passed far more tests than I think I can remember passing. But it's just like, I feel like I've passed more than I would have passed. But I only took like 3 panic tests this round. So actually, is it that unreasonable that I passed all 3? Probably not. Whereas if you said to me, oh, you took 10 panic tests and you passed 4 and you failed 6, I'd be like, yeah, that's about right. Testing on 7s and 8s, I'd expect that result. And flip it the other way. If you fail 3 tests when you're testing on 6s, which is classic Baratheons, your unit's dead.
Feels bad, man.
And that's all you might. That's the only panic test you might take all round. Might be those 3 panic tests all on one unit. You happen to have failed them all, and your unit's dead. Simple as that. Done.
I don't know. Like maybe he's right that maybe it is. Maybe it's the way Terra says, which is just culturally dying in combat is cool, but running away isn't. But failing morale tests, and I really am a big proponent of like, don't complain about your luck. Dice are just dice. You have to expect things to happen. Failing a panic check just feels bad. Like it just feels bad to me. Do you know what I mean? Especially when there are so many mechanics which build into the pass or the fail. Do you know what I mean? Like there are so many cards that can be played on a pass or played on a fail, and a huge part of like some units or whole factions' identities are based around either passing or failing. And for it to come down to just such a small number of dice is a negative thing. When you roll something more like 7 dice, you get a far more repeatable, reliable outcome, and it's less swingy. And that's why I'd like us to roll more damage on attack and less to be invested in this small dice roll, which can go one way or the other. But like I play panic-based factions. I also play healing factions like Renly Baratheons, who very largely rely on passing the test, even though you don't necessarily have amazing morale. So like I'm willing to take the role. It's not a terrible mechanic. It's not absolutely the worst thing in the game at all. But I do, and I mean, I don't know if Jesse, if you were here earlier, but I do prefer the old panic mechanic. I do think that the amount you failed by, it not being a binary scale of just you either do or don't take the damage, I do think that system was better, and I preferred it.
Yeah. Randomly, my headset went off there because I'd forgotten to charge it in my infinite wisdom. So as a result, I didn't hear half of what you said, Carlo. But I assume it was absolute wonderfulness. And if no one heard it in the chat, let me know.
Gold as always. Gold.
New headset, new setup. I have to change some settings, by the way, on Streamlabs, guys. I have no idea if you heard Carlo while I couldn't hear him. If you could hear Carlo while I couldn't hear him and I look like a fucking idiot, let me know, because that's really useful, because it means I can just switch my headset off, pretend to listen to Carlo and just nod, and then switch back on when it's my turn to talk. That would be very helpful for future. Yeah, I think I agree. I fundamentally agree. The panic versus attack dice versus armor versus morale is a balancing issue which is clearly off at the moment. And yet we look at it, and we look at the units and specifically the factions that navigate this the best. I don't think it's a coincidence. I really don't think this is a coincidence. Targaryen, what do? Well, they roll fuck tons of attack dice constantly with lots of different things. Yeah, be it outriders, screamers, veterans with potentially 2 attacks, flayed men, right? Dragons, which you kind of ignore the mechanic, right? They roll fuck tons of potential wounds at you. They're really good. Night's Watch, hunters, awful crossbowmen. I don't care about the infantry. Hunters and crossbowmen. Okay, catapults to some extent. What is it? It's a potential lot of fucking wounds / attack dice that navigate through and can cause panics as well. But it's the attack dice we're caring about, right? Free folk, spearwives, 100%. Spearwives is why they're there. There are other reasons as well, but it's spearwives. They're rolling lots of dice. None of these factions at the top are actually factions that rely on you failing panic tests to win games, ironically. But when you do, they really win.
It's just a nice little bonus.
Exactly. Whereas on the flip side, look at Baratheons. Baratheons roll 7 or 6 dice. The vast majority of their units are probably 6s. I don't give a fuck. Like they don't have any attack modifiers as well, which is a problem across most of their units. And then it's like, oh, if they take the panic, it's good. But it's like, yeah, but you're only rolling like 6 or 7 dice at best. You don't have multiple attacks. We talk about it as a meme, right? But one of the units which was such an opportunity to inverted commas fix Baratheons a little bit, or at least give them something, was making Thornwatch like Ranger Hunters. It was just like just give Baratheons Ranger Hunters, and it's fine. And then they didn't, and everyone was like,
I mean, give any faction Ranger Hunters.
I mean, yeah. But I mean, Baratheons especially, they wouldn't be wallowing at minus 53 then. And you would see a Renly side, I've got 4 units of Thornguard, fuck, come at me, bro. They'd still have no activations, but who cares? If Ranger Hunters were activated every time, maybe they'd be balanced. Yeah, I don't know. It's it is very telling. And the units that do, and the factions that kind of do all right and can muster decent attacks, attack on panic and things like that, the likes of Greyjoys and Lannisters, like wallowing in the middle a little bit. But Lannisters almost entirely rely on flayed men for their offensive output of attack dice. Otherwise, it's the likes of Red Cloaks, Stormcrow, Archers specifically. Poor fellows, aren't doing fucking attack dice at you.
That precision, though.
That precision. Oh, that came up in a stream yesterday. Precision on 5+, better than any other keyword. Facts.
So we're 1 hour in, Mickey.
Yeah, we're 1 hour.
Talking about today?
And what we're talking about today? Well, the actual news, right? The actual news is the 2022 update's still not here, which I'd already said. We've just been talking about the game, haven't we? I think that's what people want. It's been 2 weeks since we were last here. I haven't got a fucking clue what's happened in the world. I have legitimately not been watching the news as carefully as I normally might. I say that, but I've been on Discord literally every day because I have no life. But yeah, there's not actually a huge amount that's gone on, right?
No, it's been pretty quiet.
Yeah,
everybody, I feel like both sides of the water, UK and US, sorry, Europe, are preparing for the Scottish GT and for LVO. So I think that there's been a big lull over Christmas. We saw the number of events being run really dip,
fall off a cliff
over the Christmas period.
Yeah.
I think we're just getting ready to start. I don't know if people are not playing in anticipation of rule changes. I feel like that happened very much with the way that Visions were put out last time, and the whole many month period between Visions claiming that a new rulebook will be out in January, and then it not coming out till March, April time. Was it even May? I forget when it eventually came out.
It was,
but
June.
We saw
May, June,
a catastrophic cliff edge of people not playing the game anymore during that period. And I don't think that that's happening now. There are still people preparing to play big events. There are still people playing online. There are still people enjoying the game. I do hope that the period of time between the update coming out and them saying it's coming out doesn't stretch on for ages again, because I do think that from the day that they announce that an update is coming to the date that it actually comes out on, there is a waning of interest in people playing the current game.
It's a weird one, right? Because I don't consider the 2022 updates the changes that they've said, purely because none of the wording of the changes has been released, and therefore I don't know what the change is. About the only one I can muster and say fair enough, if someone said they were using it, is if they said we've got commanders not scoring 2 points a turn. I don't think you can just pluck that rule out and put it into the current 2021 balance and be, that's a rule change we're just going to have and play the game as it currently stands with everything else as we know, except that one thing. Of all the rule changes, of all the things we know that's upcoming, I feel that's the easiest one to pick out and just put in, and I still don't think you can confidently do that within the rules and expect balance. But as far as I'm concerned, all of the other rules, you literally can't, because you have no idea what the rules are. You have quite literally no idea what the rule is. So how can you possibly implement it? You can put versions of your implemented rule if you want, and I'm not going to say people are wrong for doing so. But I'm straight away telling you, if you're expecting to play those rules, expecting to get a feel for it, it's not a very authentic feel. Because my opinion would be, well, what about how does that rule interact with, like the NCU rule and wilding diplomacy, for example? If you don't know how that interacts, how can I possibly play Mance Commander against you? And say, we just didn't really use him that much. I was like, well, then you're not. Are you really playing the full game if you're just kind of banning half the stuff immediately because you have no idea how it interacts?
Yeah. I mean, I actually watched yesterday. Yeah, I watched yesterday. I watched Brett play Core and Halfhand in the Canadian Open. Ariakas was commentating on it, and Halfhand ran Gilly. And I actually asked, Ariakas, Gilly didn't die in the first round, wasn't forced to activate and die, which is what her rules as written state. And I was like, have you made a ruling on it? And Ariakas was like, yeah, he asked, and yeah, there's a forum post on it. But then I was like, yeah, but the forum post doesn't tell you what the rules are. The forum post just says, oh, the rules are wrong. And it's the same kind of idea for me, which is that you saying, oh, by the way, these things are changing. And I'm going to give you a little bit of it's going to be, and then you give me a description of the new way that it's going to work. I'm like, cool. Can't use that until you actually tell me what the new rules are. The day that you write them down or the day that I use them. And yeah, I mean, it was a janky Night's Watch list. You know what? I mean, he almost made a comeback in that third round, fourth round, whenever it was. But yeah, I mean, it was always going to go bad, in my opinion. But yeah, I am of the opinion that he has not provided enough information for you to be able to play Gilly.
I tend to agree.
Though he answered it on the forum, right? I'm not saying that I disagree with his post, his ruling, or anything like that, or that I refuse to accept his ruling. I'm just saying you haven't provided all the information, so I can't use it yet. And it's exactly the same with their rules, which are okay, so you tell me that commanders aren't scoring points. Are we changing? But you also kind of said I believe, I might be wrong actually. I believe they hinted that they're changing the game modes at the same time, right?
Yes, they did.
Because those two things could well be interact. The game modes might now all score +1 victory point for holding the center objective, or all score +1 victory point for holding more objectives than your opponent. Something, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the intended interaction and landscape that you're going to put that rule into is. So I can't just say, oh, I quite like the idea of that new rule, which in general I do. do like the idea of that new rule. I do think it's an improvement. I'm not going to implement it until the day where I see it in the rulebook. The day that you update the rulebook, I'm like, cool, we play the new rulebook, but not a day before.
That's a problem. I can understand why people want to play Gilly, though, right? People want to play with the toys they've got, and having something in the game which is, to put it bluntly, within a competitive atmosphere at the level we're playing at, and the rules kind of like, I guess you'd call it rules lawyering, which I don't ever consider it to be rules lawyering, to be honest. But I know other people do. But at the level that we're discussing the rules at, people don't want to have that discussion. They just want to play Gilly, and they just want to be able to play Gilly on the table, and they just want a quick, like, how does it work? Just let me know. And that's a problem that, to be honest, we can sit around and we can be honest to them and say, look, if you want to know how it actually works raw, this is how it works. But we can make a reasonable ruling, and I don't think I disagree with what Ariakas has said. It just activates whenever. It leads on to a bunch of other ridiculous questions like watch captains and things like that.
The problem is the problem with that quick fix is that you can pick it apart and abuse it. And so I'm like, what are the actual words? Because you've either just massively buffed Relentless and Night's Watch again, which I don't think anybody wants, or it's got some really weird wording, which nobody can quite figure out what it could possibly be. Anyway, that's a whole different thing. But I wait in anticipation for the new rules. I really don't believe that they'll be out in the next 2 weeks. I'm very much working on the assumption that they're not out in the next few weeks, 2 weeks or so, which will be the cutoff, I think, for both LGT, Scottish GT and LVO.
I think Scottish
LVO definitely has a 14th of January or something like that as its cutoff point.
I think Always Winter. I think John Craig has basically said he's not taking it. If it wasn't here by the 1st, it's not being used, and it's not here.
Yeah, it might already be past it.
Unless he changes his, unless it comes out literally this week, I don't see John saying that yes, we're using the new rules.
There is also that thing from Doug, which is that there is this really
tenuous,
not quite explained concept of there being tournament rules and non-tournament rules, which I don't know how much of what they discussed is now considered would be a separate tournament rule set versus full rule set. The only one that they seem to indicate definitely that they thought of as a competitive tournament rule versus not being one was removing the ability to pass with a unit, which seemed really odd. But
well, we talked about that at length. I don't really know why that is.
I am going with basically I'm going by list lock, right?
Yeah.
Like list lock on the 14th for the GT and for LVO, I think. Is if it's not here by the 14th, then nobody in their right mind is going to have a discussion at either of those events about implementing those rules, because you can't change everybody's army lists after, you can't change the rules of the units that they've locked them in. That would be mental.
Yes.
Not that Demon didn't already do that in an event that they ran back in 2019.
Yeah.
Between day 1 and day 2 of the tournament, they released updated rules, right?
Yeah, and which isn't a problem, because in theory, day 2 of the tournament just uses the old rules. But it was the fact that Simon were involved with it.
Yep.
With the event, and I think
Simon
they said
were running the tournament.
These rules.
Simon ran the tournament, and they changed the rules of the game between day 1 and day 2 of the event, including changing the pricing of people's units such that the army list that they brought the day before was now no longer legal.
You had to make new lists, right? They did actually make people to make new lists, I believe.
It was just surely.
Yeah.
But what if you didn't bring any other units?
I know.
Crazy times. I feel like we've moved. We're probably better than that now, right? Maybe.
Yeah. But
to be fair, the game and its competitive community is moving forward, right?
The thing is, though, and this is where, the likes of Joey and Terra and kind of people in chat have been saying this as well. It's the fact that we've been strung along with previews for so long, rather than getting actual just straight up, here's some stuff. We do want, I'm not going to say don't ever give us previews ever, because previews are interesting. We do want to see previews. And if they give us like a little taster, like they did before Christmas, and say, look, here's some of the kind of rules that we're, just so you know, these are the things we're looking at. Like, that doesn't bother me. If they say, look, these are the things we're looking at, that's fine. What's annoying is they then say, here's what we're looking at. Here's kind of where we expect this to go. Again, having a goal and explaining that goal or objective, not a problem. But then giving us literally no indication of what that means or what the grander scope is, and it's like the implication of that is a massive issue, which they'll never touch on. But you get half a story. You get, here's the previews, and perhaps too much detail from the previews themselves, but still all unusable. So all you can do is speculate, which is a marketing technique, by the way.
Obviously the old thing was to show you everything except for the points cost.
Yes.
Show you the entire unit, rules, everything. You get to know everything about it, but you don't know how much it costs.
Yeah.
So you can't really implement it. I mean, you can, but you're just taking a guess.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be like, if you're confident enough to put a price tag on it, and then it turns out to not be right, you'd be like, what the? You know what I mean? If you're like, if you're like, okay, can we all agree that this is definitely a 6-point unit? And everyone's like, yes, okay, that's definitely going to be a 6-point unit. So let's all just play it as a 6-point unit. And then it turns out to be a 5 or a 7. You'll just be like, what? Anyway.
Yeah. So Joe's kind of like saying the right thing. If they'd have said, we're looking at Commander scoring 2 points around, and we do think that could be changed as a hangover, so we are going to be looking at within game modes and seeing where that can be changed, I'd be like, yes, okay, that's a reasonable thing to just. But then for them to just blanket say which they kind of did, basically, all objectives where they currently score 2, they no longer score 2, is kind of what they said. But we don't actually know that that's what they said, guaranteed, as in like it's true for every game mode. And they didn't actually say what the word would be, and that's the simplest of the 3 rules they described, right? The NCU one, they said NCUs won't be able to activate. Okay, brilliant. But do you address the multitude of issues that brings around if they can't pass? Just say, we're looking at NCUs not activating and how that can be, reasonable. Don't tell us what the rule is, though. It just... Sorry.
Carl says, what event was I complaining about when I said that they changed the rules mid-event? I might be wrong. It almost never happens, but sometimes it happens. In that, I actually believed that Carl was involved in the event, but I might be wrong. So that's what suddenly makes me think maybe I'm wrong. I only have secondary information. I believe that the event was UK Games Expo, run by Simon, I believe 2018. 2019?
19,
I don't know
19.
which. What I have is I have second-hand information from people who were there who have told me that the rules changed between day 1 and day 2, that the lists changed, and that points costs changed, and that changed whether or not their lists were legal. But I also believed that was an event that Carl possibly was running on Simon's behalf. So maybe I've got the two things. Maybe that's not an event that you ran, Carl. I forget whether or not you ran something in London or ran something in Birmingham. Anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm confusing 2 different events, but I have second-hand information that happened. That is...
I believe the update came out on the Saturday from 1.4 to 1.5. And the game size changed. Fair enough.
Game size changed.
Good one. I won't go into that rabbit hole. Doug, say you want them to talk about what they're working on change on. Yeah, you do, Doug. Yeah, you do. It's just that you don't want them to actually say exactly what their changes are. They just want you to say, look, this is what we're looking at. Because the moment they start indicating change, people start trying to use change rather than just saying, right, well, here's the rules, and this is it. Someone literally today said, I'll actually, like, this is a legitimate thing. I'm going to read this out word for word that he said he made a mistake. And it's said he made a couple of mistakes in the game. The third one, playing with old rules that were more advantageous for the Baratheons, as they could sit and wait for me. And I was like, what possible old rules was that? And then I asked him, like, what old rules are you playing? You're not playing 1.6 Baratheons against 2021 Greyjoys here, are you, or something like that? He's like, oh no, as in like the current rule set of Commander Scoring 2. And it's the fact that he'd already referred to it as being an old rule set. Now I know that's an individual, but actually that's the point.
Yeah.
Is that you end up getting people thinking about this when we're still here, and it's okay to think about that, but you're not playing it. It was really difficult. The other side of it, the other side of all of this, of course, is we are now 2021 going into 2022. There could be a lot more changing than was initially said, right? And I know we covered this earlier. It's going to be a problem if they change too much, right?
Well, it won't be an improvement. Like, you missed the opportunity to make a definite iterative improvement, right? If you look at and understand the current game situation, and you're like, we know that this is not performing well, we know that this is performing really, really well, then you can take the opportunity to just change X thing that's not performing well and Y thing that is performing too well. If you start to just change more and more and more stuff, then you create more and more opportunities for you to get it wrong. And if their current situation is actually good, then you just create situations for it to be worse than currently is. So if you just make small iterative changes, you just like Tycho's overperforming, make a really small change. People have talked endlessly about what that could be. It could be, I'm not a big fan of him healing less wounds. I'm actually a bigger fan of changing the timing on his trigger. I think that all it would take is a trigger timing change to make Tycho not so prevalent and powerful. Flayed Men, I actually don't want Flayed Men to be nerfed, because I think that they're at the point at which all 8-point cavalry should be. I would like other cavalry to be brought up to their level. I'd like all 8-point units to be brought up to their level, because you'll see that they are a bastion and beacon of high point cost unit in amongst everything else just being cheap chaff, being too powerful. And then you're pretty much looking at, well, Poor Fellows are too good for 4 points. Conscripts are too good for 4 points. Raiders are too good for 4 points. Greyjoy Archers and Greyjoy Chappers, too good for 4 points. And what you need to do is you just need to tweak them all down a bit. Watch Captain needs, all Relentless probably needs some kind of rejig. But you can list like 10 things that are too powerful, 10 things that are terribly weak, which I don't necessarily always agree and believe. Like, actually, the unit rankings aren't supposed to tell you that the 10 lowest rated things are the worst things in the game. That's not actually the way the unit rankings work. They tell you that they're the biggest opportunity cost, that you could have bought other things that are good. So you'll see, what's that, Mountains Men at the bottom?
I can believe that they are crap, though, for 6 points. I actually genuinely believe that they are.
The biggest thing is that there is no reason not to use Red Cloaks, right?
Yeah. Like,
so
I can firmly believe that Mountains Men are crap.
They're that much worse than their other options in the 6-point category. But anyway, there are 10 things that are underperforming, which is pretty much just, Baratheons. Pick the whole Baratheon roster and make it all better, because you're not going to make their deck better, are you? But what I'm saying is that we should, when you just tweak, and I really do mean tweak, it's really tiny little changes to the things that are too powerful, tiny little changes to the things that are really doing badly and never being picked, you will only ever improve the game. If you try and change everything, you really roll the dice and hope that whatever set of things that you've just imagined will improve the game actually do. Yeah. And that's why That's why I don't think it's the best option.
I mean, it doesn't take the competitive players within the game. It doesn't take even like not even that competitive. But I use competitive as in, to be honest, good players. They don't have to be super experienced. They don't even have to be super competitive players. Just anybody who plays the game and watches the game, watches content for the game, and interacts with the game to an extent where they consider building good lists, bad lists, and go through that whole process of the thinking about the lists and then, of course, playing the lists to some extent. Anybody going through those cycles to any level, I think will get some solutions to the game within a couple of days of balance. And I don't mean they've solved the game perfectly. Always, if we look at an optimized list now, it's not the same as an optimized list 9 months ago, right? Or on release. Well, not on release. To the point, when I say that, the theory and the components are mostly the same. Like, there's probably 30 points of the list, which is pretty much dead on. But it's the small 10-point variance of how do I get the most efficiency out of those 30, 25 points or whatever it is. It's those fringe choices that make the competitive lists what they are, because that's actually people really rinsing the efficiency out of list building. Those things get settled within a couple of weeks, maybe up to a month, to really get the efficiency going. And that's just because people need to play the matchups a lot more. That is something that can only really be gained by playing the actual game in the new meta style before you can really understand, right, well, hang on, how do I get an advantage in the Night's Watch mirror match? It's like actually dropping this component, which is pretty good, and picking up this one.
Okay, yeah. But you're talking about real subtlety.
Yeah, oh god, yeah. I'm talking like 4-point changes across the whole list.
Of XYZ.
Yeah. Day one, you didn't see awful double crossbow.
I'm trying to think. When do we think the first time that we saw the awful list?
Well, I mean, technically it was made by playtesters. Larks came out in start 2021.
No, see, what's interesting is, like, I've already looked at Larks. Okay, when I say the awful list, I'm talking about double crossbows.
Yeah.
Larks has never been a double crossbow player. He's nearly always used scorpions and or stone throwers.
He used
with
double crossbow
one unit
in playtesting, I believe, when he was back doing playtesting. But it was, I want to say, day 2 or day 3 of recorded results, probably. Going back a long time.
A guy called...
Who was the first person recorded game on stats is not quite the same as the patch, of course.
First recorded game... Funnily enough...
Is it Bob?
I had no idea. No. The first person to lose to it was NRG Scott.
Ha, lol.
which is crazy because he barely plays.
So it's Daryl using it, I'm guessing.
No. He played online against a guy called Macher. Majcher. I assume he's Polish. He played triple conscripts, double builder crossbowman, watch captain, Baelish. He played Walder Frey. To say that is like the 100% list, I don't necessarily.
No, but it's what we're talking about.
I don't think that Walder Frey is it, but like
it's what we're talking about. It's the concept of the list up to a couple.
It is 36 points identical to the best lists that people run. 36 points identical to the list that won the LGT some 6 months later.
So how long did it take us to get the stats builder up? It was about 2 weeks.
Well,
right?
the very first results came in on the 19th, and that list was already winning games by the 22nd. So 3 days later,
I want to say that
it took 3 days for people to build it, find opponents, and start playing with it.
From release on stats, of course. I'm trying to work
from
out
release on
actual...
stats.
I am actually going to look at when the exact release date of 2021 is now, because it was May 12th. May 12th was the digital release. So what? That's 5, because it took us a few days to get the site up and running, didn't it? So
I'm not sure. I forget. I feel like I might have done it in a day, but
I think it took us a couple of times because you were working on some other stuff at the time. because obviously
Maybe.
the relook and stuff. But yeah, I mean, even then, we're talking like 4 or 5 days to May 12th to when you said the 22nd.
22nd.
So
yeah.
10 days, which is still, I mean, 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks. If you can comfortably say that.
Well, there were no results. There were no results until the 19th, so it seems that it probably must have taken a full week to get it up.
But even though it's 2 weeks, 2 weeks is all it takes for us to find a basically settled matter. And I say settled as in, I use that term very loosely. Settled just means people know what the really good shit is, and they know what the really bad shit is, or at least will know roughly. Settled is a very interesting term. But yeah, the thing is, they're going to release these updates probably in January. By February, we'll already know where things lie, probably. And we'll see what happens. The thing is that if they change too much, it'll take a little bit longer. It'll take more than 2 weeks than perhaps a 1 weeker. But if they'd have changed a little amount, you'll be able to get that settle point quite quickly and actually be a much better place for it. With changes like this, it's going to take it 2 weeks to settle, but it could well settle, like it did for 2021, in a place which anyone who's playing 1.6, no one plays 2021 and say the game is infinitely better. They say, yeah, it's just different. Not actually a better game, just different.
It's not a better balance, not in my opinion.
No. So yeah, I think we'll see. We will see, of course. I don't want to be too pessimistic. Just being realistic at this point, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's coming out. We'll see what happens. I don't know where that conversation started or where that was going from. The idea of small
news, Mickey.
Small
it's
changes.
The news.
It's the news. Fuck it. It's the news. Let's go with it. So anyway, I was going to talk about tournaments, but I was actually going to talk about 2 tournaments that have ended. First of all, and I know we said we'd do some Hall of Champions stuff, which I did do, but then there was also a bug with the site, which everyone knows.
I don't think there is.
I do. Oh, he fixed. No, honestly.
No, I didn't fix anything, Mickey.
I know you don't. I know you don't do any work. This honestly was not working for anyone a couple of days ago, or at least when I was talking to people.
Magic.
I think it's. I think it was an AWS problem rather than a site problem itself. But anyway, there were 2 events I wanted to go through. We've talked about the Canadian Open. We've already touched on it, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. I actually wanted to go back to the Wargames ID ELO event that did end, I'm going to say over Christmas. Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of ended before Christmas, kind of. With the eventual winner and tournament organizer Van going 4-0. Mikkel came second with his 4-0, but he was using Greyjoys, who at the time, I think Greyjoys were higher during the event, so he earned less points.
Well, I mean,
generally speaking,
Van Van's using Tywin and Gregor, who are both very low rated, whereas Asher and Victarion aren't the lowest rated Greyjoy options.
Not anymore, no. And Greyjoys have been going. The Greyjoys were up quite a long way as well on average.
Yeah.
But Asher's pretty bad. Victarion's 55. I think he is the lowest. Mind you, I've got half these haven't loaded. Give it a second. I think Victarion and Asher are literally the 2 worst Greyjoy commanders, as it stands.
Okay.
But the problem is that their average was higher. And they are still higher than Tywin and Gregor. So,
Whoa! Did you know that 9th place? Dark Angel. He won 4 games.
Dark Angel.
Yeah, click on his name.
Yeah.
He won 4 games and got 9 points.
Because he played Mance.
Because he ran Mance. Ran Mance continuously. That's what happens when you run one of the top rated commanders into
Victarion, Euron, Gregor. They were all
interesting.
Bottom half. Yep. Don't lose a game, but still don't win the event. Yeah, I mean, congratulations.
People can run their own events. People can always, do whatever you want. Brett and Van, they put on an event. People enjoyed it. Great stuff. I would have told you, almost flat out guaranteed, that when they ran an ELO event that banned Mother of Dragons, and Night's Watch that a Lannister would win.
It's strange. It's
And
really
that-
strange, actually, Carlo, that you say that, because you did say that. You actually had a conversation with me and Weasel. We had a conversation about this tournament.
I
It
mean, I
wasn't
couldn't
on
remember
20
whether or not we said it on video or not.
No,
I mean,
we
like,
didn't say it on video. But me, Weasel, and you chat. I've actually got it in my Discord history. We actually said, look, they're going to run this event. These are the bands, and we said, because it wasn't just you. We basically said this is the person who's going to win, and this is the list they'll probably use. And I'm not saying it's predictable, by the way, guys. I'm not trying to sound like really big-headed because we didn't do it on video. I've got no proof I can show you, other than a private chat, which I have no intention of showing anybody.
You don't want to know some of the things that you said.
No, I'm a horrible person in private chats. To Carlo and Weasel mainly, they're horrible to me. It's how we interact with each other, shout at each other. But no, the thing is that we could tell it was going to happen. There was a reason.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't enter the event. We had no interest in entering the event because of this, and that's not to be derogatory to Van and Brett by any stretch. It's just predictable.
To try and explain that to people, what I'm sort of saying is, and the reason why I and we came to that conclusion is that the rating that Lannisters have, and this is actually interesting for some people who are like, oh, this faction like absolutely dominates in my local area. Why is it not really high rated on the site? Right. The rating that Lannisters have and achieve is how well they perform into an open field, an open meta. Play whatever you want, use some of everything. When they get played against all different things at all different levels and all different times, how powerful overall are they? Now, I know plenty about Lannisters, so I know specifically, in my own opinion, that one of the things that holds them back from being much higher rated and from being dominant is the existence of dragons. Dragons are a really bad matchup for them. So's Drogo, actually, and high mobility lists in general. High mobility, high aggression lists. Those things are really bad for Lannisters. If Targaryens didn't exist at all, Lannisters would be like the number 2 faction just behind Night's Watch, in my opinion. And they would, by their growth and their strength, probably push Free Folk in a certain direction to Mance. I mean, like, Free Folk already are in Mance anyway, but like their existence of a panic Lannister list kind of really hamstrings certain styles of Free Folk. But the fact that Lannisters can't really fight Mother of Dragons, Night's Watch, and all comers with 2 lists at the same time is what holds them back. That's my opinion of the faction and the meta as a whole. When you take those 2 things that they are not very well suited to fighting out of the game, when you ban them, their rating is lower than it should be. Their all-comers list, particularly if they can build 2 all-comers lists in terms of an aggressive list with Gregor and a defensive list with Tywin, plays very well into the field. That means that when you tell me that you're taking those things out of the game and then you're gonna handicap people based on the rating that they have, I'm instantly gonna tell you Lannisters are underrated. They are better than their rating suggests into the rule set that you've just created, because it's not an open, balanced, totally open and equitable rule set, which is or it's not being balanced under the same conditions that the site is using to come up with the stats and come up with those rankings. You've changed the rules, you've changed the meta, so the meta being used to generate those rankings is not the same as the one that you're playing.
Yep.
You want to do that for the health of the game, think that it's better for people to enjoy,
go ahead.
That's fine, right? But you have to understand that it does have implications. And I could have told you and would have told you and told Mickey straight away. My instant answer is panic-based Lannisters will win the tournament. And that is very much counter to the yellow tournament ethos, which is that everything should be viable because everything should be handicapped by their current rating. But if you change the rules of the tournament, if you change the rules of the game, if you change the balance of the game, everything's not correctly ranked anymore, and you shouldn't be running bans and ELO at the same time.
Yeah, we spoke about that before. Saying bans and ELO is not really suitable. People might ban offal. We would never say don't. We would say don't ban offal, but people will ban offal. So what? But it's probably just like don't ban him. But if you pick offal, you're probably a stupid idiot for playing into an ELO tournament with offal. John, actually, there are players who are not particularly strong who could be picking up John as a way of leveling the field into an ELO event in a way to pick up wins. And actually, I think that the John ban was harmful. Like an offal ban, as much as I don't like it, it's probably not relevant. Whereas a John ban, I do think is actually relevant.
The thing that's important to me is that you can probably expect nobody to play Mother of Dragons and nobody to play offal into these tournaments anyway.
Yeah.
But when you tell me that they're banned, I can 100% guarantee that I will not have to meet them, and I will 100% be able to build my lists like they don't exist. And that changing of your ability, the changing of what lists you build is what suddenly changes the meta, changes the ratings that things have and their viability. Now, that does create an interesting situation. You've created a whole new rule set, you've created a new meta, you've created a new thing, right? It's not necessarily more balanced, though. Don't kid yourself that you've created new, better balance. You've just created new balance. And people who are very well studied on the game, shall we say, and there are a number of them, do you know what I mean? Like me and Mickey consider ourselves probably a pair of them, but there are plenty of others.
Mikkel, actually, he's on there. He's a good example of someone who I firmly trust when he talks.
People, won't always have the same opinions, but if you told us that you're going to make X, Y changes to your tournaments, we can make pretty confident opinions on what we now think is the best. Because the answer is almost never going to be, oh, now the game's perfect. Now the game's balanced. No, there's just a new number one. And I think I would have always said that Lannister-based Panic was now the new number one. That doesn't mean that he hasn't played very, very well. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, like none of this matters at all unless you're already playing at a really high level. Like, that's the other thing that doesn't get discussed or given enough kudos. It doesn't matter unless you're playing really, really well. You can take, if you're brilliant and your opponent's very, very mediocre, like really doesn't understand all the intricacies of the rules. They miss their triggers now and again. They miss using one of their rules. They charge when they shouldn't charge, or they get things wrong. Anything can beat anything. You can beat them with worst things in the game if it's what the level of your opponent is. But if both players are really, really good, it comes down to things like what is the most efficient thing into the meta. And yeah, I'm pretty confident that's Lannisters when MOD's taken out the picture and offal is banned.
Well, I mean, if you look at the players that round up the top 10, and I know that in an ELO event that's a bit, how does that really work? But if you look at, say, I don't know, the top 4, you've got 2 Lannisters in the top 4. You've got, of 10, the top 10, I think 5 Lannisters, a 50% Lannister rate in the top 10. How many Lannisters? I think if we look at the Lannister stats overall, Lannisters made up 27% of the field, and they had a 68% win rate. Like, that's the point. Like, we didn't look at any of these stats, right?
No.
But we could say to you that was going to be the case before we even looked at these stats here. So, in case people don't know, it might be your first time whenever we've done this. Generally speaking, for events, more true of normal events than ELO, that is worth remembering, but actually it doesn't matter for win percentage games. The more a faction is taken, if it is actually a balanced meta, the win rate goes down, because the more it's taken, the more aggregate the results are becoming, so it's getting closer to 50-50, if you will.
Basically, when only a few people take a faction, normally they're diehards, and really experienced with that faction. When everybody takes a faction, normally at least a decent number of them are very inexperienced. It'll be the first time that they've played that particular faction, which generally leads to them making a few mistakes, maybe in their list building, maybe in the way that they play, maybe in missing triggers. So normally we see that as people flood to a particular faction, its win rate goes down.
Yeah, it is true of a general statement that you can make true, and has been true of Night's Watch actually in the meta. You know, lots of people flocked to Night's Watch, but actually didn't help their win rate. In fact, it dropped their win rate, even though Night's Watch are clearly, you know, in the way that they're played at the top level, are clearly shoulders and above most of the other factions out there. But the thing is that the win rate still drops because people aren't running those lists or those ideas or those plays. Lannisters sit there as one of the highest win rates. We don't think that's a coincidence. Greyjoys being high doesn't surprise me. We've talked about how me and Carlo believe that Greyjoys have all the toolkits to do well, and I'll reiterate, the success of Chris Tran on the website. Mikkel, for example, his two factions that he plays most. Do you know what they are, Carlo? Surely you know Mikkel.
Greyjoy and
Lannister.
Is it Lannister?
Lannister? He's more recently.
I thought he might be neutral. Actually,
he's played neutrals as well. He does play neutrals as well. But I mean, he plays Greyjoys predominantly as his main faction, but previously coming from Lannisters. There's a reason he's the top there. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about you. You're irrelevant because you weren't in the event. But the likes of other players in the event, I should say, sorry, who did well, are that infinitely well-known Bloodraven, who plays a lot of Lannister. He's also now quite highly rated. The infinitely well-known.
Did he go 3-1?
No, 4-4. 3-1. Yeah.
Who did he lose to?
He lost to Wop, who, by the way, another Lannister player.
Who is? 10th.
Yeah. And Sir Jacob Glace, who's a very well-known Lannister player internationally, right? No, he plays Free Folk. He literally plays Free Folk, and he went 3-1 Lannisters, losing to the winner of the event. So I mean, it's just one of those things.
Lannister up at the top.
Just one of those things. Lannisters just were the best choice, unfortunately. But it was a really good event.
And it's just like, if you told me that MOD wasn't there wasn't an MOD, then I'd pick Lannister. Like, not even because I'm just like, oh, Lannisters are the best, they're going to win now. I'd just be like, oh, thank God I don't have to play into MOD, which is just a nightmare and not an enjoyable matchup for Lannister. I mean, lots of people say that it's not an enjoyable matchup for anything, but, particularly for Lannister and Baratheons, Baratheons can play around Lash Out no, not Lash Out. Final Strike. They can play around Final Strike. They can kind of run the line and, maybe snatch a win. Lancers are just standing around waiting to die, pretty much, in that matchup, in my opinion. So it's just not an enjoyable one. And if you're like, hey, you don't ever have to play into MOD, I'd be like, cool, I'll play my Lannisters. That's really enjoyable. Do you know what I mean? They're my favorite faction. You know what I mean? And, I can see why a ton of people gravitate towards them and choose them when you put that ban in. The ELO tournament all but bans it anyway. I mean, Dark Angel went 4-0, and he was using Mance Raider, who's significantly lower rated than MOD. If somebody had played MOD, they definitely flat out guaranteed were not winning the tournament.
Yep.
I mean, Mance is a 73, MOD's 103, right? That's 20 difference.
Straight 30-point difference.
30-point difference.
And you know what? It's been bigger. Mance has been going up with Free Folk coming back up. But at the time of this event, Free Folk weren't third rated. They were hovering 4th, 5th mix bag thing, with Greyjoys being up closer towards the top as well.
Do we think, anybody who's still made it this far in chat, do people think that MOD is better than Othel? I don't. But you know what? I've been saying that for a long time, and people for a long time have said MOD's as big a problem as Othel is. I just personally don't believe it. But at the same time, I'll sit here and tell you that it's a terrible, unfun matchup for this thing that I play. But like, I always just believed that it was only bad for certain matchups. But maybe it's just bad for everybody.
I think Mother of Dragons is terrible for everyone. And my personal opinion, although I don't hate playing against it, I think Mother of Dragons dominates the more casual side of play. A lot of people so far, everyone in chat's been like, no, they don't think it's better.
They say no, yeah. Like
Othel,
no.
yeah. So Othel is worse.
Everybody thinks that Othel's worse.
Yeah. So
okay.
So the difference is I think
so
Mother of Dragons dominates the non-competitive scene a lot more. And I know it sounds really weird, but it's like we're kept in check by Othel and Mother of Dragons, but Mother of Dragons and Othel are kept in check by themselves. Whereas if you take Othel out of the equation, which people tend to do, this is the thing, people take and say, I'm not going to play Othel Night's Watch, or specifically those gunline style lists, I'm not going to play that style of play. And the moment that style of play disappears, whereas Mother of Dragons doesn't, I think Mother of Dragons just becomes an entity on her own. And I mean, you've only got to look, right? And I think that this is significant. For a long time, Othel had a higher play rate, right?
Yeah.
I don't know now. Doesn't feel like he's had that many games. And I know
nobody plays Othel anymore.
Comparatively low, right?
Nobody plays Othel.
He's had 282 and 162, 300, 444. 344.
Othel's become a pariah.
Yeah. And if we look at Mother of Dragons, I reckon she's had way more than 340 games. No, less. Actually, significantly less. Wow. But I bet you they've been more recent. Yeah, they've all been more recent games.
I'll tell you this. I think that there will be a ton of Targaryens at both the Scottish GT and LVO. That's my opinion. I think that everybody who's going to those events to win with their reputation intact, or everybody who's going there and doesn't want to be called a power gamer is going to bring Targaryens. I think that the numbers of Night's Watch, I'll tell you this about Night's Watch, their numbers might go up because of the impending balance change. That people think that they're about to get nerfed might mean that people are willing to play them. But generally, I think that lots of people don't want to play with Night's Watch because of the negative stigma attached to them. And I think that their numbers at the Scottish GT and LVO will both be lower than LVO. LGT is my prediction. Their entry rate as a percentage will be lower, in my opinion.
For Night's Watch.
And Targaryens for Night's Watch, and Targaryen will be much higher. Let's have a look. Let's have a look back at LGT. LGT.
Why can I not find it? Am I blind? Have I just gone past it?
I can't find it. I can find Friday night. That's
just type in Swavex. It's much faster.
Yeah. Hey, go on. Open up the tournament. See the stats.
So I reckon.
Let's have a look at the numbers. Off the top of my head, maybe there was like 20-some percent. 14%.
Night's Watch. 18%.
Okay.
But it's UK.
Really?
UK meta is Lannisters is always the highest, right? For some bizarre reason.
Okay, I'm going to go with... Oh, God, that's actually lower than I thought and higher than I thought. Okay, I reckon we're talking 10%. I reckon we're going to talk about 10% Night's Watch at LVO and Scottish GT, and up to 20% Targaryens.
I was going to say about that as well. We'll see if that's come true in a couple of weeks. We'll see if that comes out. I do think I think Scottish GT you'll still see a high proportion of Lannisters though, because
Oh yeah, of course. I'm Baratheons.
I think I honestly think the cult of Baratheon has disappeared. They'll get a higher percentage than their ranking would suggest.
I mean, so more than neutrals.
Yeah, exactly, more than neutrals. But actually, they won't have a high percentage still because I think that the cult of Baratheon has finally been broken in the sense that the edition changes
There are some
favors.
big Baratheon Dragonstone diehards that I'm now relatively aware that like they've finally moved to a second army and they just play the other army now.
Or
these
just
days
aren't as active. To put it bluntly, they're just not as active.
And yeah, Tom Bell says he's taking off. Yeah, like I mean, like, I really do hope you do. Like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't.
Him to.
I just think, yeah, I expect you to. I expect people to. The people should. It's a tournament. I never understand why people in a tournament don't take the thing that they think's going to win. But I think that there are a number of people not taking it despite believing it's the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I might not take Free Folk to Scotland, and I think Free Folk are pretty good, to be honest. But we'll see. Mainly because I still don't own a bazillion raiders that I need to beat the Othel list, and by beat I mean not die to the Othel list, and by not die I mean die slow enough that I can win. Hashtag poor fellows. Anyway, yes. Aside from that, we're going to talk about the Canadian event that has been going on. Canadian Open, which I do want to touch on now. I know that Ariakas, the Zoned, I believe, in chat, is Ariakas. He's been doing some streaming, and he's been playing some games. He hasn't actually been playing. He's mainly been watching. But people have been playing games in the Canadian Open, and it's looking like a good event so far. I don't want to say it's a good or bad event. I'm not playing in it. Not my choice to say if it's good or bad, but it seems that people are enjoying themselves. The games I've seen is really interesting. I've been talking to a couple of people who have been playing, and bizarrely, I think for an event that's quite a big event in terms of like its position itself as being you're coming here to play a proper competitive event, it's actually got some players who basically haven't played much competitive games coming into it, like some basically fresh players playing into it, which I think is really good for an online event. Because it means that it's going, yes, we're competitive, but competitive doesn't mean you have to be experienced. And it's been very interesting to see and to talk to players who are not that experienced with the game. And I don't mean that as they haven't played a lot. They just haven't really experienced analysis, looking at the game, understanding good strengths and weaknesses. They haven't done that cycle yet, but they're picking it up by playing games, watching games, and just generally experiencing that through watching streams and listening to analysis. I do think that's really good. So that's a positive in my book, because that's just raising people's general awareness, which I think is always a good thing.
Was it capped at 16 players?
Yes, it was capped at 16 players.
Ariakas. Quite a few players on the wait list didn't make it in.
Yep.
Mikhail, iJimbo, Trash Panda Bats, lot good names that I recognise there.
Yeah, he capped it at 16, and I'm fairly certain he capped it at 16 so he could get it over and done with basically before LVO. Now I say basically before LVO. I think it ends actually on the weekend of LVO. But he wanted it so it was over and done with before people went to LVO. So yeah, I think that's a positive thing by all stretch to me. And yeah, it's looking like a good event. It's only 16 players as say, but still good.
Got a very high average entrant rating at 1582. Very, very high skill level for a small number of players, which is unsurprising when you look and just look down the names and you see lots of the big names thrown in amongst all the Canadian community who are in themselves generally, at the top end of above average, shall we say, on the online scene. So it's really interested to see how it turns out. See who takes the win.
about a non-holds-barred event where people could run whatever they wanted. 19% Night's Watch, 31% Targaryen. Now, when you run smaller events, like this, which are no holds barred, I'd expect the results to be actually higher than they would be in a bigger event in terms of percentage, because you tend to get less of the small things. We saw that in the World Cup, in that like certain factions just don't appear, and we see here not a single Baratheon player. That's actually quite rare for a no holds barred event. You usually get Baratheon players at least entering, but it's such a small event at 16, but being big enough to not be like 5 people.
There
Where
is
people just pick different
no
stuff.
offal though.
No, there's no offal, which is really interesting.
No offal.
People
Yeah,
still
no
don't
offal,
believe.
and 2 of the 3 Night's Watch players have already lost.
Yep. People genuinely do not want to run offal, and it's really sad.
Yeah. Well, it's not that sad.
Like,
we're not cry a tear. We're not cry a tear for offal. Like
I'll cry a tear that people believe that they shouldn't play the strongest thing in the game. That's why I cry a tear. And part of it is our fault.
I do believe that this is hoped to, in future, become a in-person Canadian event.
Yes.
But obviously, current requirements mean that it can't be. So hopefully it'll do some good to get some growth in the Canadian community in general. Good to see a number of Canadian players that I don't know or aren't competing super regularly in there. Hopefully they'll have a good time. Hopefully Ariakis himself will go on from this and be buoyed to run more physical events in the future. And I hope it goes well. I'm sure it will.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Let's see which Targaryen wins, right? Do we think it's going to be a Targaryen winner? MOD wins?
I don't believe that the remaining Night's Watch player is decent. I don't think it will.
Oh, Sandwell. I haven't seen him in a while. We got double Swarm brothers with watch captains instead of crossbows. In with Roos. That is interesting. That's basically the Othel build, but you're running Roos and Swarm brothers instead of Othel and crossbows. Weird. Also
and
running bow and marsh
over Jaw.
Yeah.
It probably has some play. I don't know what he's looking to play into, but maybe he has some play. I don't like it.
I like the John list. I do think that is a very powerful list where you run John in Hunters and you still run Crossbow Captain, because I think Crossbow Captain is very good even outside of Waffle. Double conscripts. Ghost frees up an extra point.
It doesn't have Jaw though. Still
doesn't have Jail again. Yeah, I think I feel like Thranduil might have been one of the people that I had a conversation with, and one of those people who's just entirely against zone replacement. He believes that what he loses in the zone replacement is really, really negative, and that's therefore like he uses Bone Marsh for almost the same reason, which is he wants to get particular tactics cards out. But personally, I just think that JR's just amazing. But Amon, Tycho, Bowen, I think that John list's very good.
I'd like to have seen Jaw the Bowen, but
yeah, it just increases your reliability, your control, and your consistency.
But it's the same template: the double conscripts, 2 7-point units, and 3 NCUs. You play around with the watch captain points. In this case, the watch captain gets turned into Ghost. So
yeah,
it's the 9 activation like kind of staple.
I'd be interested to see how far this list goes, whether or not it beats multiple Targaryens and Lannisters, which it's gonna have to come up against. I hope it goes far. Like I do actually. I would like to still have a Night's Watch player in amongst the top for the first few weeks.
Mm-hmm. It's
Targ, Drogo, Mother of Dragons seems very classic. Yeah, he's gone for 7 activations with Bolton Blackguard and Barristan Selmy in the Mother of Dragons. That's an interesting matchup that I do want to see play out. That versus the Night's Watch. Might happen. Who else do we got still in there? Endline, very good player, bringing Lannisters. Roose Tyrion.
Yeah.
I think that he'll do great against Night's Watch. Less so against MOD. Not so sure about other Targs. I think he's got a chance against other Targs, but we'll see. But he might end up playing against Greyjoys, which would not be what he's been expecting. Geordie Gamma has brought new Greyjoys. That's super interesting to see how far they go. He's got Cleftjaw and he's got Black Tide. Interesting. Really interesting event. I'm really, really glad that somebody's running. I mean, obviously, as the creator of ELO, I love it when people run ELO events. They're great. They're brilliant. But every now and again, you do need to just run an event and see what's the best in the game.
Yeah.
And I'm super interested to see which way it goes.
Yeah, I forgot to change the thing to tournaments. Thanks, Blood Raven, for reminding me to be better at doing this whole streaming thing. No, I actually want to pick up on what Ilo said there, Tom. He's saying it's not that people don't want to play awful, it's they have been thoroughly shamed. It's an indirect product, I guess. And I go back to what I said to Tom at the LGT, right? Is that I believe that Tom is a good player. I want him to play something that's not awful out there and prove to me that he's a fantastic player. That's what I want. But he doesn't have to. If he runs awful and keeps running awful and winning with awful, that's still going out there and doing the job that you need to do. But in the vice versa, I'd never say to him, yeah, but you're running awful, you should just feel bad for running awful. No, I would expect him to probably win more games than he loses. But he shouldn't feel bad about running something in the game, and the fact that anyone's been made to feel bad is a bit annoying. And
I mean, yes and no, right? A person shouldn't feel bad. No, you absolutely never should feel bad. But I always try and talk about it from the inverse perspective, which is that people should have a reason to not run him.
Yes.
Right? Which is obviously the whole point of the ELO balance on the site, which is not just ELO tournaments, but that you receive an amount of ranking points based on the rating of the thing that you played versus the rating of the thing your opponent played. That creates an incentive structure for you not to play him. And obviously it's much, much better for you to incentivize people to play things that are underperforming than for you to penalize and to consider it as penalize and to shame people who are playing the top stuff. It's better for us, and I include me and you and the community as a whole and competitive players as a whole. It's better for us to reward and champion the players who are playing underperforming factions and doing well with them than it is for us to chastise and make people playing top stuff feel bad. That's not actually, it's not fair. And you know what, to be honest, at times I've been partly guilty of
I think we all have
of the weight at which we make people not feel like a MOD MOD as well. An MOD or awful performance is worthy of being considered a good performance just because of what was used. I would say though that you have to compare that to I would say what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say measure somebody by what they do, which is that I also play awful, right?
Yeah.
And this goes a little bit back to I said I don't know why people aren't taking the best faction that they think that they can win to the tournament. And Doug said, why aren't I taking awful? Well, I would take awful, Doug, except for the fact that I said that I'd try and win with every faction, and I've already won with awful. That is the only reason I'm not playing awful, because I've already won a tournament with awful. And so, in my mind, they're done. until the balance patch comes along, or maybe even after a balance patch comes along. I'm not trying to win with that faction. But if I was out there just to win 100%, I would be fielding Othel. And I would not be apologizing to people for it. So I would say, yeah, like you do take people on what they do, not on what they say. And I do sometimes downplay the, value and like quality of playing Othel, and yet will happily play him myself. I'll happily play against him, and I'll happily play with him.
I will, to kind of like summarize that all though as well, like it's not that we are trying to shame, and certainly never meant to shame anyone as well, in certainly the rhetoric that we've had, which I know sometimes is quite off-putting sometimes. It's that we want to see players that we think are good, that seem to be performing on a good level. We want to actually see them do something else. Like, that's all it is that I want to see you perform with something else, Tom, because I get a better gauge for how good you actually really are. And at the moment, I can't separate you from what I see, which is I've only seen you play Othel, therefore you are as good as Othel is. And I actually think it devalues you as a player up until the point where you don't run him, rather than it devalues you because you're running him, if you see what I mean.
Also,
that's from my perspective, not yours. It's my perspective. Yeah. I don't consider you as good as you probably are because of that. But that doesn't mean you're bad. That's the thing.
There is another thing which is a lot easier on TTS. People who don't play on TTS, there is a financial burden
100%.
attached to it or whatever. But I also personally, I massively have higher opinions of people who play multiple factions than those who play one faction.
Strange
myself.
You should say that. Very strange you should say that. You know where we're going now, don't you? Surely.
I think so. I think we're going to badges.
We are going to go to badges. There isn't really much to say, is that most people have now got extra badges, and well done for collecting badges for anyone who's done it. But also, I'm going to sap everyone's motivation completely and say that this guy has been YOLOing over everyone.
Yeah, Drogon has managed to get every faction badge, every faction and commander combo in the entire game, including all of the neutrals, because obviously neutral doesn't have a neutral variant, and Free Folk don't have a neutral variant. So he has completed the game. How many games has he played now? What's his total?
He has
300?
played 273.
273 games. I eat my words. I take it back when I said that nobody has played every commander in the game. Drogo has absolutely proved me wrong. Not only has he played them, but he's also won. He's above 50% win rate now, right? For a while, 55%. He was at exactly 50%. Check that graph out. He's been rising up the ranks. He's actually sat at above 1700 now.
1711.
It is actually insane. It is genuinely insane, and I might have to come up with some new badges just so that Drogo can come and try and get them.
I mean, it's nuts if you think of it like this. Like, I will go as far as saying it. He went from 1340, say, all the way up through playing events, the GT, things like that, all the way up to 1710, call it for now. Sat there at the moment. He has risen fully and like meteorically through the rating structure, and as a result, he's doing very well. And part of this is he's winning, but part of it is also playing a lot of factions. He's probably getting better as a player by simply playing and experiencing more factions. I don't believe that playing makes you better, but it certainly provides you with the opportunity to get better. And if he's been capitalizing on that opportunity to learn, then that's why he's come up where he's got to. But I mean, I will also say that Drogon is also a madman. He's playing like 2 or 3 games a day, right? He plays a lot. And
that's an average of like one game a day since 2021 came out, right?
Yes.
Possibly more. but you can tell from like how many data points there are in the timeline. He's massively upped the rate at which he's been playing in the past 4 months or so.
Yeah.
I would say 2/3 of his results have come in the second half of the edition. So you're definitely talking closer to 2 games a day for the past 4 months. Like consistently for 4 months. He must have been playing at least 10 games a week, if not more, for the past 10, 15 weeks. Crazy.
Yeah. It's actually nuts. I'm sure we can find something. We'll think of something. We'll think of something that can be done about all of that. But yeah, I mean, congratulations to Ross then. The number of games he's played is just astronomical. But it has taken him a lot of games, 200 and odd games to do it. Although you'd argue some of them were before the badges were even out. And it took him about 3 months. 3 months to do. Since they were announced, it took about 3 months to play them all, which, that is a game a day basically, or 2 games a day on average since then at least. But yeah, so kudos to Ross, and anyone else who wants to try and catch him, go ahead. But unfortunately, they've all been done, so there will be no firsts anymore. Ross is the first.
World first.
World first.
Yeah, I was just thinking, will it happen again?
I think it will. I mean, I don't know. I was looking to do it slowly, but the thing is, you can't do it slowly because you've got to play games. I've not played a game really since before Christmas, and in fact, the games I played against you, Carlo, was the last time I even played a Song of Ice and Fire.
It doesn't happen by itself. You have to really go after it.
You have to try to do it. That's exactly it. And you have to play games like Drogon's doing. I can't dedicate the time, like a lot of people, can't dedicate the time to play a game every day necessarily, and as a result, I'm playing at a much lower rate. If I'm playing at a lower rate, then I'm not going to be getting the badge anytime soon.
I just think that chances are that like more commanders will come out before I've even finished. Crazy. Well done to him. I honestly didn't think it would happen. I really wrote that off as an impossibility. I think that there was a massive...
Like all things, you set a challenge. I want to do
it. Yeah. I think that there was a massive rush to people to finish off the 1, maybe 2 main factions that they play most of. I do think that the rate at which badges are going out has decreased relatively significantly. I didn't notice loads of changes other than Drogon. I'm sure there was a badge here or there, and I hope that everybody's really happy with their badge. They're not super widespread. Not super widespread though. Only 1 in 5 people or so has a badge. They are clustered towards the top of the table. These are the people who play the most and engage with the site the most. But there are people further down who have badges. People right down at the bottom have badges too, which is great to see.
I know that some people have been looking to get them, so yeah. Obviously, kudos to anyone who does. Like I was saying, if he wish he could, if he had the time. That's exactly it. It's actually a time investment more so than it is a... I'd argue that it's more of a time investment than it is an actual game investment. I don't see it as I need to play games to win with these commanders. No, I see it as I need to invest X number of hours in playing the game in order to get wins with all of them. And to do that...
Ross is in chat.
Ross is in chat.
He just wanted me to eat my words. Yeah, well, I do. I didn't believe that anybody, including playtesters or game designers, had ever done it. I still back my comment. I still think that Ross is the only person who has. I really do. I think that Ross is the only person who has. So well done to him.
I will say this. Drogon, Ross, you've played everything in the game in terms of commander and faction combination.
Mickey's about to downplay his achievement massively now.
No. What do you think was the best actual faction / commander combination. Of course, I could say that, and he just says, "Oh yeah, but I won with them all," so like whatever. And he could say, "Well, the one that took me the least amount of wins is the best," but quite a few of them probably only took him one. If he's got a 50% win rate, quite a lot of them probably only take one. What was actually the game that he went into thinking, you know what, it's easy to build a list, it's easy to pilot the list, and getting the win was easy. And I will say that some of the players that played Ross again, that Ross probably played against, some of them probably aren't that good. Some of them are probably really good. So
you won't give me a job. I mean, you're on the wrong channel there.
Oh God,
there,
yeah.
Ross.
It would be really interesting to see though who he thought was like the best combination, from the perspective of he has played them all. So
yeah, what's the best? What was the worst? What was the easiest faction to build the list with, play, win, and you felt in control? What was the hardest that you were like, oh my god, how am I ever going to win with this commander?
Yeah, I'd love to know. Send me a message or just post it in chat. It's absolutely fine as well. I bet the worst was the Baratheon. You could actually look it up and see how many wins it took.
Well, I mean, I'd say overall, the Baratheon faction has to be the worst because of the sheer number of commanders in it. Personally, I would think that like to get the badge as a whole, like neutrals are bad, but there's only 4 commanders. You just got to get 4 commanders. Whereas I forget neutrals have, including the Baratheons, including the neutrals, are at 14 commanders. I think.
So.
I think is it 5 each side plus 4 neutrals? I forget. They do have the most commanders without a doubt, though.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, because you
have
the 2 Stannis and 2 Renly, and then you have 3 randoms. So yeah, I think that's right. I think it's 14. I should know. I've got the non-neutral ones. Yeah, I mean it's obviously a great achievement. And like all these things, there was always going to be a first. We didn't think the first would be that quick, but I've been on the internet before.
First would ever happen. Like I honestly thought people would chase 1, 2, maybe 3. Crazies go for the 4, all 8. No way. No way.
I've been on the internet for far too long, and I already know that once you hit enough people in a community, which I do believe Song is big enough for this, is that you will get someone who will go out there and try. Baratheon Vargo Hope.
Okay, which is funny because I feel like there was a while where Vargo was like possibly going to be the best Baratheon commander because of his weakened with Wardens combo stuff going on. Mm-hmm. But yeah, okay, fair enough. I see it.
Right then, it's coming on for an hour and a half. We've been back for all of about
2.5.
2.5. Jesus, yeah, sorry. We've been back for all of about 1 day already. We haven't even played any games of Song, Ice and Fire recently.
I did. I played twice today.
Oh, you did? I forgot that you went out and played twice. And beat our friend Star.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Anyway, it's time to talk events that are coming up, and give a big shout out to all of the events obviously coming up in this month. We have the Long Night in somewhere in Russia. Check the map, check the event itself on this weekend, January the 8th. Also, we've got another event in Just Play in Liverpool this weekend as well. We also have the Coronation of Kings, which is in Arizona. Yes, the US, which is looking like it's a World Games in Scottsdale, Arizona. 32 players, so kudos to them if they can get the player numbers for that. It's running the Sunday and the Monday. Don't know if they intended that. Oh no, it's Monday morning. It's Sunday through to Monday. Sunday night. Anyway, that's it for this week. So Coronation, Just Play in Liverpool, and the Long Night in Russia. Best of luck if you're performing any of those events, or if you're going to attend any of those events, and of course any other games you play throughout the week. Anyone playing in events such as the Canadian Open and all the various other events currently running, wish you best of luck for the games you're playing there. I hope they go well for you. And then, of course, looking further ahead at the bigger events later on in the month, I didn't realise it was this soon, but literally next weekend is Always Winter. No, not next weekend. The weekend after. Why did I think it was the 14th? The 22nd.
No. 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks is always winter in Scotland. We've got LVO the week after that, so 3.5 weeks. There are some smaller events since then, though. There is Sunday Slaughter's Gamers Haven Open 2. Jesus Christ, what a name. Another event run by the Sunday Slaughter guys in Gamers Haven in Ohio. They're looking to put another event together there. That's not this weekend coming, but the weekend after. Some more events in Poland. I would give them a shout out, but let's face it, if you're in Poland, you don't need me to tell you to go to events. You do it anyway. So anyway, some more events happening in Poland, in Warsaw and Pruszków. Butchered that one for any of our Polish viewers. Some more Italian events coming up in... Oh, that's an ongoing event, I'm guessing. Oh, no. Wow. An Italian league. Starting in January, ending in November. I look forward to seeing that. There's a serious number of games that are probably going to happen in that league. And Weekend Warfare, which is also on the same weekend as Always Winter as well. Everyone playing A Song of Ice and Fire across the world, obviously have a great time. We will catch up next week anyway with hopefully some more news, some more stuff on the events and things. We'll check out some more of the interesting stuff that's happened. But aside from that, we wish you again a happy 2022. Carlo, is there anything you want to say before we go?
No. Just get back playing. I wonder. I need to go back and talk to some people about maybe a big TTS event, which I know somebody was trying to organize, which has gone quiet on for a while. So we'll see whether or not a big TTS thing comes along. That would be really good because nothing in the calendar right now. Big wise. Do we? No, doesn't matter. That's a whole long conversation. Just really glad to be back playing. Good to have a break, but really looking forward to what comes next. And might plan some new badges now that Drogon's, prove that all those ones were easy. I do like Carl's idea. Actually, a very simple thing of you also have to beat every commander combo in the game.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, we didn't check on Drogon's wins. Can we perhaps go void some of Drogon's wins if he's just constantly playing against like Andrew Estamont? I wouldn't do that. Jesus Christ, I wouldn't do that to any man. But also, if it was awful that you beat every time, that would be a very different question. All right then. Anyway, we will leave it there for today, guys. Thank you very much for joining us, all the viewers that we've had. I really do wish the best for 2022 for all of you. And
See you next week.
We'll see you next week.